Hi, welcome to the Center for Cybersecurity Policy and Laws webinar on building PQC and crypto resiliency across the public and private sectors. I'm Davis Hake, Senior Director for Cybersecurity at Venable, and today I'm joined by an amazing panel of experts on the transition to PQC. We're going to discuss how companies and federal agencies are tackling this transition, some of which have been doing so for several years already, and how they're driving internal support among executive leadership. We'll also discuss what type of solutions can be leveraged for starting crypto asset identification and how the federal government is promoting and prioritizing these efforts across the .gov. Today, we've got with us Brian Miles, Principal Member of Technical Staff at AT&T, Bill Newhouse, a cybersecurity engineer at NIST, Vladimir Sakurev, VP of Cryptographic Research and Development at InfoSec Global, and finally, Dylan Pressman, Director for Budget and Assessment at the White House Office of National Cyber Director. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So to kick us off, and maybe Dylan, we defer to you as the official from ONCD. You know, the transition to PQC is a really complicated issue. I'm not a cryptographer, but even getting executives engaged in the security professionals to wrap your head around the threats around harvest now, decrypt later, or even the headlines over the weekend about China's progress on cracking RSA and AES encryption algorithms. I wanted to ask, you and our panel to help set the scene for why this topic is so urgent, and what is the risk from cryptoanalytically relevant quantum computers?
Davis, thanks for the question. It's a good one. So why now? So let's set the scene a little bit. We've known since the 1990s that a sufficiently mature quantum computer would be able to crack some of the fundamental cryptographic systems that we use in the digital ecosystem, specifically RSA and Diffie-Hellman. But back then, it was sort of a mathematical, theoretical problem to be played with. The last couple of years, the technological advances in the last decade or so have transitioned that theoretical problem into a real one now. Now we know with the progress that many of the big players like IBM, Google, and so on are making in advancing quantum computing technology, we know this is now an engineering challenge rather than a theoretical problem, and that's why these things are coming to a head. So NIST have been working on this issue for quite some time, and Bill will talk a little bit more about that. But since about 2016, NIST have been working on finding solutions on the cryptographic algorithms and developing new cryptographic algorithms to replace the ones that eventually will be broken by quantum computers. The federal government, the administration, this administration particularly, has been very forward-leaning with Congress as a partner in pushing for this transition to get started at the earliest possible date. So back in 22, there was a couple of pieces of presidential policy that went out called NSM 8 and NSM 10 that directed the federal government to begin the transition to post-quantum cryptography or quantum-resistant cryptography. So that piece of policy had two messages. The first message was quantum computing and quantum technology in general is going to be a significant benefit to humanity, benefit to society, benefit to our economy and to the United States as a whole. And also there is a threat, and we need to address that threat as it gets closer. And that threat comes into, we've seen quite a lot of this at least on the technical side, in the technical media, as we know that our adversaries are engaging in this practice that you brought up, which is harvest now and decrypt later, which is where they have been storing large quantities of encrypted data, and then with the knowledge that eventually a quantum computer will be able to assist them in decrypting that data. So that's why the you think about the lifespan of data. Um, if you're talking about sort of sensitive medical data, you probably want to protect that for like the lifetime of the person, who the medical record is about. If you're thinking about sort of the names of spies or informants and the law enforcement side, again, that's probably, 50, 60 years. You want to keep that data safe. If you're talking about um, intellectual property, some of that can have really long shelf lives. Obviously, on the classified side, we usually have a 25 or 50-year time span that we want to protect that data. So if we know that our adversaries are already collecting the data, and if we know that they're just waiting for that moment when the cryptographically relevant quantum computer is developed, we need to protect the data at the front end of the data cycle, of the data life cycle, rather than the back end. It's going to be too late if we wait until the quantum computer is mature enough. It's going to be way too late. They're going to have a lot of access to a lot of data. So that's why the administration has been pushing very hard to get this transition moving. The other thing to consider is just the amount of time it will take to implement such a complex transition. This is not simple. This is not something we've done a lot of. There have been a couple of cryptographic transitions in the past. People talk about SHA-1 when that was broken, but there hasn't been anything of this scale, and it's going to take time across the enterprise, across the federal enterprise, across industry, for these huge transitions to take place. So the federal government has set the goal of having the most sensitive systems transitioned by the year 2035. That sounds like it's a long way away, but when you're talking about these sorts of transitions, 12 years, 11 years is really not that far away. And that's why it's critical that industry and government and state and local governments are working now to begin the transition, take the initial steps. There really isn't time to waste. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I can chime in. And so great answers, great input, for sure. There was a Forbes article last year that I remember reading. It was about the quantum, the impact to the banking system or impact to our economy if there was a quantum breach of our banking system. It was to the tune of like $2 to $3 trillion. It was like the economic impact of all the cascading effects, and would likely trigger a 6-month recession to our economy, just like that, from one major attack on our banking system. I think that's just something that really highlights how important it is to start taking the steps to address this problem now.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great scene setter for the scope of this, right? And I think that that's something that when we talk about this issue, you talk around the year 2035, it sounds like, first of all, some science fiction idea that we'll have quantum computers, which isn't, and it's an engineering problem now. And also 2035, is probably a ceiling, not a floor. To your point, Brian, we may be in an area where an adversary has the ability to decrypt then and may not even know it, right? I mean, to your point, we can start seeing issues with the financial system. Dylan's point, you can start seeing assets or sensitive government informations all of a sudden appear in the adversary's possession without really understanding why. It's unlikely an adversary would announce this to their newspapers that they've achieved this capability. And when you talk about a damage that big, it's not surprising then to see back in July, OMB come out with their headline-grabbing number that the U.S. government believes this is a $7 billion problem. And Dylan, going back to you as the policy official, but also interested, in Bill's position. Why is this a $7 billion problem? And how do you see the impact of that level of funding continue over the next decade?
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is I would urge not to get too fixated on the number 7 billion. The federal government has required all departments and agencies to provide the administration with estimates of the cost of the transition. But we know we're at the front end of that work, and we know that this is complex work, and these are rough order of magnitude estimates at this point. As Bill will undoubtedly talk about, the NIST has developed these final algorithm standards, and industry is beginning to adopt those final algorithm standards. But a lot of in most of the arena, the exact costs are not clear yet. However, it is clear this is something that's going to take significant resources. And there are a couple of reasons. One is just the scope and scale of the federal government. And the other is that there is the issue of legacy systems within the networks of the federal government. And there will undoubtedly be systems that will not be, that already can't handle the kind of cryptographic requirements of a zero trust architecture. And so will certainly need to be replaced, in some cases. And when you start talking about replacing systems and the interdependencies between departments, between federal and local agencies, between industry and government, that's a big deal. That's a big, heavy lift. And 7 billion is probably ballpark. At this stage, is probably the most accurate ballpark estimate that we have, but it's never intended. That number that OMB put out in the report was never intended to be a definitive cost analysis, simply a starting point so we can understand the scope and scale of the issue within the federal agencies. Now, of course, within industry, that scale of response is likely to be similar.
Let me just add on to that. Call it a $7 billion effort to migrate, not a problem. It's the problem is migration is complex. It will take a while. There's a lot to think about here. The problem is that these are new standardized algorithms that are not yet in international communication standards, but those organizations, the IETF and ETSI and others, have been working with the draft algorithms such that on August 13th, when the 3 new standards became final, meaning that their parameters are believed to be the best ways to give out a standard to be followed. They are now a standard to be followed, is really what I want to say there. That there's an effort that follows for those organizations to add those to communication protocols, which then allows technology providers to put them into their technologies. And then NIST has a whole algorithm validation and module program validation programs that are happen after those steps, because to enable the communication protocols that rely on asymmetric encryption to use these algorithms is in some places research. It's been research that's been going on for a couple of years, and now it becomes product in a couple months, right? And so that day the standards hit, people couldn't go out and spend any of their $7 billion. I'm kidding, but it's like the money they're planning to spend. What's the denominator on all spending for IT and cloud and other services that you use? Is this is part of a setup that's going to be your just normal modernization, because the next version of the products will have some of these standards in them. How much are they going to charge for that? I'm not an economist. You called me a cybersecurity engineer, which is my title here at the center. We're trying to work to show, hey, these new standards exist. What could you have been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years? Well, we're going to get to it. You can talk about doing cryptographic discovery and inventory and making decisions from that. And those decisions can be migration, but they also can be mitigation. And then the other aspect is what I was just talking about, the interoperability of these standards into these communication protocols that will need to be modernized. TLS, for example, that's the main protocol when people are thinking, store now, decrypt later, that people are grabbing all your TLS traffic. And what data are you sending over that TLS traffic that is your long-lived data that you don't want people to be able to see 5 years from now, 10 years from now? That's something that organizations will be expanding their decision tree on. They know about high value assets, they know about their data, but now they're asking this question of what crypto am I using to protect it more directly?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And Dylan mentioned zero trust, and you started, Bill, you raised a lot of good points about where to start with cryptographic asset identification. And, this may be a bit contrarian, but, to those who look at PQC efforts specifically as a future threat, but then all these things that you just mentioned are best practices that people are doing for crypto resilience, for zero trust. They'd ask, like, where do I prioritize? Do I prioritize zero trust efforts today or this PQC migration effort? And I guess, for both you and Vlad that deal with companies and organizations in this transition, I would say what would be more important for an organization to think about? PQC readiness or, crypto resiliency overall and zero trust?
Hey, Vlad, since I've already spoken, if you want to go first, please.
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about these two, right? So I think we should not be comparing them to think of them as competitors, take care of that one, forget about this one, or start with, PQC, forget about zero trust, or vice versa, right? So we should really prioritize and say, okay, both are important. And actually, it's best to find overlapping components for them. If I'm taking care of one, why not take care of another? Let's say I'm doing crypto inventory. We know zero trust needs to use cryptography in many places. Well, if we are assuming we don't trust anything, we can even think of them as somewhat similar problems, right? If we're assuming there's no trust, we got to verify each time. Well, how can we even trust what cryptography is in there? So if we're doing crypto inventory to understand what we need in order to migrate from quantum vulnerable to quantum resistant cryptography, why not at the same time check our environments and say, you know what, I don't trust this environment, whatever it says there right now, that it has proper cryptography. I have tons of third-party applications. I had, generations of developers going through the ecosystem. I'm not going to just read some notes and trust that. I want to get the proper inventory to understand what is the true cryptographic state of whatever the application or ecosystem that I'm looking at. So I think there's a lot of overlaps that can work together. And I think in terms of priorities, both of them must be, one of the top priorities. And I think that's what I'm seeing from, at least from the NIST side. It feels that, in terms of documentation and various initiatives, I can see them, both kind of coming at the same time, which really, from a, I guess, commercial side makes me happy that, we are able to see that both areas are needed and both are being developed and acknowledged by NIST.
And Dylan mentioned the memo that came out in November of 2022 that said to the federal government, do an inventory, and it was asked to be done as essentially a paper exercise in a spreadsheet. And the folks would hopefully when they got it, they recognized the question was high value assets, critical systems. Which of those do you have? And frankly, that's some inventory they've been submitting regularly since the earliest days of data loss prevention. We wanted to know questions, and often the crypto question was, what do you have crypto for data at rest? Do you have crypto for data in motion? And this effort, began now I want to know what that crypto is, and I want to know, a little bit more about those systems. But so you had a group of people who were already answering that high value asset, that FISMA high question. And there was a memo, M2209, I believe it was, that said, please start implementing zero trust architectures. And please was more than please, but, do. And so agencies have been dutifully moving towards that. Well, you have a group of experts who've been staring at what data do we need? The question of zero trust is I'm moving things around that I value and I need to protect at a certain level, and I'm going to implement policy. It's everything we've always wanted to be able to do with our data and more. And so now you have experts who know something about your data. So they should be part of your migration is really what I'm getting to. If you're thinking about quantum resistant and being quantum ready, your zero trust should get you there, because those products will be modern and new and probably have what I would call the technical stack architecture that will be ready and agile and able to take on these new algorithms. And if they didn't, that's a little oops. We wanted to get in front of people and say, if you're building new technology that you plan to deploy in the next couple of years, please make it quantum ready for these new algorithms. Make space for the size of the keys, make space for the size of the messages. And that doesn't support all use cases, but it puts you in a good place. So I think a lot of this question, this conversation is, you have experts, go find them and make sure they're part of this. And you did this 7 years ago for GDPR. You did this, you asked different people what they knew about your data. Get those people back together. Over.
David, so I could just build on what Bill and Vlad were talking about. I really liked how they framed the issue. First of all, I would just reiterate that quantum readiness and zero trust are not contradictory. They're actually the same thing. That a fundamental pillar of zero architecture is cryptography, is ensuring that your data, like Bill said, at rest or in motion is encrypted. And so ensuring that it's encrypted with secure cryptographic algorithms is obviously fundamental to that. And then to sort of build on that concept, what we really push in, especially in what my organization is pushing, especially in the federal space, is that we think about crypto agility as we build these new pathways to the quantum safe or quantum resistant algorithms. That we're not building systems that are reliant on one algorithm, but rather we're building systems that can be agile, because we know that this isn't the only time cryptographic algorithms are going to be broken, or this isn't the only threat to cryptographic security. We need to build that agility into the systems so that as we, as new algorithms are developed to address newer issues in the landscape, there's a relatively straightforward way to switch out algorithms, which is not the case in a lot of our legacy systems that simply were developed before concepts like zero trust or the universality of encryption were in place. Back to you, Davis.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when, all of these efforts, right, have to be sold. Vladimir, your point that there's a lot of things to do in PQC that are on your existing zero trust roadmap. And Dylan, talking about these ideas are philosophically parallel, right? That starts to speak to, okay, how do I prioritize this from a budget standpoint? And this is something that, both all of our panelists on the private sector side and the public sector side have to answer with, how do we get this funded, right? And I imagine that your answers are well, I'm interested if they're similar or if they're different. But I am interested in speaking about, and maybe Brian, you can kick us off here, but what are some of the strategies that, you've used internal to your organization to align this goal with business leaders that also look out and see this as a 2035 problem that's not going to be they're not going to be around for, right? And similarly with Congress as well too. But Brian, why don't you kick us off talking about what that was like with your organization and building success for that over the past couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So we started looking at this, me and one other person started looking at this, just quantum computing, quantum security, just kind of the whole quantum space roughly 6 years ago, just trying to learn it, get familiar with it, understand, quantum sensing, just some of the different impacts, some of the different opportunities. So probably somewhere around 3 years ago, we really started to attack the quantum security parts of it. And it became utterly apparent almost right out of the gate that nobody really understood what a quantum computer even was, let alone, what kinds of things were going to come about from that, what kinds of threats or risks were, on the way to organizations like AT&T. So one of the first things we did was we started an awareness campaign. So this awareness campaign was just about getting, across the enterprise, getting people familiar, getting other work groups, other work teams, pretty much across the organization or across the enterprise, just some level of awareness about quantum computing and quantum threats. That included, we have some regular cybersecurity newsletters that go out. We did lunch and learns. We did a lot of lunch and learns, still do lunch and learns on a whole variety of topics. We had just some different sessions, like briefings with other organizations, just to get them up to speed. And it took some time, but that laid the groundwork and got us the leadership buy-in and the budgeting support that you were mentioning a moment ago. That was critical to being able to move forward and actually start addressing and start implementing some of the solutions that we've come up with.
Yeah, I'm wondering too, from the government side, the public sector side, I know that Congress has been clued into this issue for a while. I know they were the ones that requested the cost figure that we talked about earlier, Dylan. But what's been the federal government's efforts to make congressional leaders aware of this threat as well too?
Yeah, as you said, Congress has been there was particular members up on the Hill who are very interested in this issue. You know, essentially, this is an existential threat to the digital ecosystem as we know it, and there are those congressional members that have a longer time frame that are really, pushing the federal government and the critical infrastructure owners and operators, industry partners, to start taking action. So, as I mentioned, there were these two bits of policy, NSM 8 and NSM 10, that required the federal government to take steps to begin the transition. Congress followed that up with the Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Act in December of 2022, codifying those policies into law and requiring certain steps in the federal government. And Congress there was some other piece of legislation in progress and have been pushed forward. Pushing this both the opportunities that there's so much great opportunities. I want to keep stressing that because, and then Bill mentioned this too. Quantum computing, quantum technologies, they're not a threat. They're a wonderful opportunity. They're going to be really significant benefit to society. There is a threat associated with them. We have to clear-headedly address that threat first, chronologically, but they're not fundamentally a threat. They're fundamentally an opportunity. So all of that is to say, the steps look like, first, know what you've got. That is, take a good hard look at where the cryptography is within your systems, within your data streams. That may seem obvious. It may seem like a really obvious thing that, well, we know where our crypto is, but that's actually not the case. Most organizations don't have that clearly mapped out. And that's a fundamental aspect of a requirement of going to a zero trust architecture, just as much as it is a fundamental activity within the transition to post-quantum cryptography. First, know what you have. Second, prioritize that. You can't do everything at once. So what are your most critical systems? It's not as important to protect your conference room booking system as it is to protect your, the very lifeblood of your data. So prioritization is a huge important step, and that's where you get leadership both within your boardroom and in the federal system involved. Like, what are the critical systems that where do we need to be working first? And then, plan of action. Create a realistic plan of action that's clearly budgeted. And the federal government's been doing quite a lot of work on that. That's where the $7 billion number, spectacularly, attention seeking as it is, comes from. That's us beginning to push that work. And meanwhile, we're watching as industry partners are beginning to make significant moves. We saw last year Google transition over to draft quantum resistant algorithms, and they're making their tweaks there. We're seeing lots and lots of partners move, industry partners move. A lot of them partners with Bill's Center of Excellence, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, to develop, on the ground, boots on the ground solutions for some of the kind of more interoperable.
Hey, Dylan, if I may, let me take that. I'll steal the baton from you and say, one of the things that Congress and the White House asked of NIST was can you lead a standardization process, and we were also asked by other international cryptographic organizations and essentially other governments, and NIST took that challenge on since 2016. But one of the asks was create industry collaboration, and there's three levels of that at NIST, and one is the cryptographers who've been working together. It's an open and transparent process to examine algorithms, to identify and select. They've done it through a series of rounds, and the fourth round is still ongoing. So there'll be other algorithms that continue forward, but we have three that are finals. Here at the center where I work, we've established a collaboration with a large number of organizations, 40 at present, to explore what does it mean to do cryptographic discovery and inventory, because it's not a skill that many have had And it's also kind of a question, what size organization needs to go get these tools? Because if you're buying all your services, you may not need to do that. You can just ask your providers, when will you be quantum ready? So I'm quantum ready. So we have that. We also have a large group of people who are just tracking when we put out a publication and updates to our work. So we will have essentially what I call demonstrations, and Vladimir and Brian, you've got some colleagues who are part of this through the ADIS organization, and we'll have results. But there are other collaborations that have been established in advance of these standards as well. Definitely within the financial services sector, I'm witness to a fair amount of their conversations, and in the GSMA, which is the Global System for Mobile Association, they've got a post-quantum cryptographic group together, and they've just put out their version 2.0 of use cases. So you can go immediately dive into this paper. You'll have to Google it, but it's called PQ.03, Post-Quantum Cryptographic Guidelines for Telecom. They've got use cases that are internal facing towards the telephony providers, and they got use cases that are the ones they have to provide for their customers, so that us as users of these systems will benefit from quantum readiness and quantum resistant cryptography. So part of what I'm getting the emphasis here is that, like, we're learning together, because this is a migration of a scale that we believe will take a decade. That's why 2035 is on the table, is be ready by then. And so all these groups together are figuring out the little nuances, the extra places to look, the complexity of applications, and different ways that people have applied crypto before. Inventories can be scary, because you go in your fridge looking for mold, but you might find a few other things in there too, and it could scare you a lot. So I'll stop there and let other people bounce in.
Yeah, Vladimir, that sounds like a perfect tee up over to your side. I think, Dylan and Bill have done such a great job laying out the strategic level about, how you go. What's the tactical, practical level about how you get started as an organization starts to look there and begin, right, their own crypto resiliency efforts?
So there's actually multiple steps that need to be taken. And, some organizations have kind of bypassed step zero. Step zero is what Brian has talked about, awareness, right? Awareness and education. And, organizations like AT&T, it's great that they've done it internally. They understand quantum threat. They have a good knowledge, and they're ready to say, okay, let's get actionable now. Actionable meaning doing inventory, doing migration, etc. There is other organizations that are saying, you know what, we formed our PQC migration team. Now what? Like, the team literally doesn't know what to do about PQC at all. They don't know what a quantum computer is. They don't know what, they might not even, understand the difference between, QKD versus post-quantum. So you really need to educate them, and depending on their levels, you have to, provide high level or, go to the weeds of all the math in there, etc. So it's really the educational part. But the organizations that are saying that we formed PQC team, they still make me happy, because at least they understand this PQC migration is needed. Also, they have no idea what that is. And then there's other organizations that have no idea that PQC migration needs to happen. And so that's the awareness. That's where you would need to, kind of bring more awareness in there, because it's not just the security. Because if we think, globally what we're doing, if there are a lot of organizations that are not aware of PQC, they're going to be late in migration. We're going to lose interoperability instead. So that's an important part, again, for us as a, private, public sector, community, bringing it all together, making sure organizations are staying up to date. So that's step zero. Now, then step one that we tackle is really the crypto inventory. Now, although for some organizations, the main goal might be saying, okay, let me find those quantum vulnerable algorithms. But this is a lot of, tidying up from past 20, 30 years that needs to be done. We'll be seeing MD5s, SHA-1s, etc., all over the place. Are they quantum vulnerable? Well, if they're classically vulnerable, of course they're going to be quantum vulnerable, but that's a more, more current threat. But the beauty is that, when you're doing your crypto inventory, you can really, do it in one shot. You're just going to see these things are currently broken. These things are going to be broken by quantum computers. So it's nice to have, one effort taking care of both, and really, again, tidying up. It's really should be changing the way we think about cryptography. And the major change that that is really happening, and again, thanks to PQC really putting fuel into all this, we're switching from saying you must use crypto to you must use good crypto. Now, word good brings a lot of extra efforts, but we really need to have them. And then, of course, the next step after let's say you've got your crypto inventory, you understand what you have, you understand where your threats are, you've built a proper, timeline, because again, we understand organizations are not going to be able to do, enterprise-wide migration in one shot. That's not feasible really for, I guess, 99% of organizations, but they need to prioritize environments, prioritize, what they need to do first. We even go a little bit further. Sometimes we actually say, you know what? If you want to help with some prioritization, we can even go and count with respect to the number of logical qubits needed to break various algorithms. That could actually be one of the tools to help you out to say, well, which algorithms should I migrate first? Which ones should I migrate later, right? Because, again, not everything that is quantum vulnerable is equivalently quantum vulnerable in terms of the years quantum computing is going to reach the proper scale. If something requires 1,000 logical qubits versus something that requires 20,000 logical qubits, there's probably quite a few years in between the two. Again, you need to migrate it all, but there's still a need to do, there's still some time gaps, and they can help you build your timeline. And then final step is, the very difficult step of actually changing your cryptography. How do you replace your current algorithms? We know that historically, SHA-1 to SHA-2 migration for large organizations took 5 to 10 years. Mathematically, a very simple change. There's no rocket science from a mathematician point of view. Talk to any, math and cryptographer, you can say, well, that's simple, and there's nothing. SHA-1 to SHA-2. I mean, it's you're really changing the same, pretty much the same function for another function, which has roughly the same, digest sizes, etc. There's some little variations out there, but from an engineering point of view, it's huge. That's why for organization, 5 to 10 years to do the change. And PQC migration is much, much larger. There's way more things that need to be done. Now, we don't want to go into the effort of changing, and if something happens along the way, you need to change again. That's another problem. Or even something logically happens, right? Today, we have 3 finalized algorithms. Now, there's going to be more coming. We know there's going to be more standardized. There's round 4, there's a parallel track for digital signatures, etc. So there will be more changes happening. It's a guaranteed thing. You don't want to redo migration every time there's even an update. Even if we forget about talking about, the vulnerabilities being discovered, or maybe some parameters need to be tweaked along the lines, or, something's going to happen along the way. So crypto agility is really what, we are bringing our clients to as well, is that you want to be able to change crypto on the fly. Now, changing crypto agility is an effort, but it's a one-time effort. After that, you would be able to do the changes pretty much, on the fly. And the reason being is that, again, you don't want to be redoing your migration each and every time there is a change. Plus, there's interoperability, there's other aspects in there as well. And also, it's part of tidying up for the past 30, 40 years. Because before, the number of cryptographic variations was actually quite low. There was not much to do. People thought, set it and forget it in terms of cryptography. That's no longer the case. So we really need to have the crypto agility. So 3 major steps. Step 0, education and awareness. Step 1 is doing crypto inventory. Step 2 is really doing the crypto agility. I mean, it sounds it's only 3 steps, but each step is huge.
Yeah, just to add on to what Vladimir said, one of the things that we refer to, everything he said is spot on for sure. As we start looking at what it actually takes to implement some of these solutions, it has become absolutely apparent that, a lot of the underlying operating systems and things, they're not ready for PQC. Only some of the most recent releases of operating systems even allow TLS 1.3 or even support it. So, there's a term, I guess, that we've come up with or that we use is PQC capable. So you got to be PQC capable before you can even start applying some of these mitigation solutions.
That's a really good point, Brian. And Vladimir, too, when you also lay out the timeline of these efforts, I know we mentioned that earlier, but you really start to lose the decade that we have as, by then everybody should be, right? And we know that, it's probably likely an earlier date that we may see this technology out in the wild. Bill, did you have a follow-up point?
Yeah, well, it was something you and I talked about as we planned for this, and it's, are these now you asked, well, innate question was, these new NIST FIPS documentations of this new standards, are they the de facto standards?
Yeah.
And they are the de facto aim for standards because there's nothing that's been deprecated yet by NIST. So there's a process with a new algorithm being identified and standardized, and then it gets called out in other documentation about digital signatures and the different ones that are essentially NIST offers the standards and guidance that then OMB says you will follow. You will use these that NIST has identified. There'll be a transition plan. Right now, it really is it is that 2035 timeframe. In the next 10, 11 years, there will be documents that say, okay, in a certain amount of time, we're going to ask everybody to move off of something and the existing, what we'd call, quantum vulnerable algorithms. And so that'll be bigger trigger moments. And that'll happen when industry has prepared itself just to the right level of they can sell, they can get us products that have these new algorithms in them. And it'll be rational, right? It'll make sense. It won't break things because people still need to communicate. And there'll be other, and so I just wanted to highlight that there's a whole slew of NIST publications that frame this for the non-national security part of federal use, and that a lot of voluntary adoption. For instance, a year ago, November, well, it's not November, almost a year ago, a guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I've got a new app and I managed to sell it to this one group. It's got PQC in there," which in November of 2023 meant they were using a draft algorithm. They've implemented it. Good. That's positive. They sold it to somebody. So, they were happy to start using it. Then they went to somebody else in a different industry space. And that industry person said, "Great. Has it been validated by the NIST, cryptographic module validation program, which follows on the algorithm validation program?" And the answer is no way, because it wasn't, yet a standard algorithm to be validated or to be put into a module that can be validated. So there's a lot of smart people in industry who know to wait for validation, and that it's a joint program that US has with Canada, and there's a whole testing suite. They've updated the testing suite. They've got it ready so that now products will start to hit, and that now that'll start to really, you'll see things happen in 3 years, in 5 years, with a little bit more of the mandate, to make changes happen. And it'll be when we're ready. And when we're ready is because we're still learning about these things. Then while we're getting ready, let's get that crypto agility concept in place. Let's get the next bit of embedded stuff to be large enough and robust enough and built well enough that it'll support all this stuff.
Yeah, Vladimir is one of those smart people in industry who've been involved in this effort with NIST for years now. I'm interested. The private sector drives, even if it's a voluntary standard, the private sector drives a lot of best practices in cybersecurity. Are you guys, even though it's not a requirement, are you guys telling clients that the new NIST guidance and the new standards are now the new floor, or how do you guys view it?
So when we talk to our clients and we explain to them, we first of all, of course, let them know that this is not an easy process. This is going to be a time-consuming process. And to echo what Bill has said in terms of, while there's all these procedures, CAVP, et cetera, that are being in progress, take care of other concepts, be ready, be crypto agile to migrate. The thing is, what's important to understand about this PQC readiness. The previous migration that the world was doing in terms of cryptography was going from RSA to ECC, or partially going, right? Not everybody has actually been migrated. But the drawback, if you did not migrate, what are you going to lose? Well, maybe you're not going to be as efficient in terms of the key sizes. Maybe you're going to be a little bit lower in security, but nothing critical. If you don't migrate from, classical algorithms to quantum resistant ones in time by the CRQC is available, it's a complete destruction, right? It takes one large CRQC, just one CRQC is needed to be able to destroy. And as you've talked about, that we can actually go into recession just on the financial sector if something like this happens. So just to realize that historically, we've actually never been through such an important and huge migration. And this is one of the things we're talking to clients about, right? This is something that we know is going to be huge. Everybody is starting to understand that it's going to be huge. We're educating our clients that it's going to be huge. We're telling them, there's things you can do now, even if you're waiting for, FIPS certification, et cetera. There's a lot of things that can be done now and should be done now, because otherwise you're just going to be not in time. And this is the biggest cryptographic migration in history. Everybody understands it's big, who is in the area, but we can't even imagine how big it is. Even us being experts in the area, I think is going to be even larger than we can even think about it, because the cryptographic infrastructure, it's huge now. It's everywhere. Every little device we talk about has cryptography in it. So the impact is enormous. Now, and the fact is that there's a lot of things, as we would use, let's say, cryptographic term to a certain extent, entangled, using, from the quantum kind of technology, because everything's so interoperable, entangled, there's a lot of dependencies. So the migration is going to actually trigger a lot of points, and you need to make sure that it still all works after the migration. That's why there's a lot of preparation that needs to be done for migration, so that we can do the migration as smoothly as possible.
Hey, Davis, if I may, one aspect that when Brian talked about getting the organization to be aware of the upcoming challenge, and Vladimir's really framed it really nicely. You've got other activities besides zero trust and continuous diagnostics and monitoring is a name of a program for the federal government and non-national security part of government. Well, and to know what it has. And so a lot of inventories have been grown in the last 10 years, and everything, the idea, we know what applications are running on what devices and who's running those things. And you would think to yourself, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could do that for crypto? And it would be, but the complexity and how far you can go and do that in a practical real-time way is not there yet. So when I talk about maturity of the industry and that we're kind of researching this stuff, we have the means to see what the TLS segment, what was negotiated today and how we used it. How to use that as a real-time trigger to other risk decisions and things is less exercise muscle in all organizations. So it grows. We're going to, in just exploring this, you're going to find that security architects will never forget crypto in the future. Whereas, Vladimir used the words, set and forget has kind of been where crypto has sat for a long time. And the few people that knew where it was set knew to go back and double check when new guidance came out. And now we're asking, a lot more eyes to stare at this stuff. So we have an opportunity here to really grow some great people, because like I said, I think if you dive them down that far into the software stack, into the ISO stack where crypto happens, they're gonna be so curious. You're gonna have to, it's going to make us, more mature and a better place to deal with the agility questions that we need to address as well.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting, having been a former DHS official myself and involved in a lot of the launch of CDM with John Stroifer back in the day. Seeing the PQC effort start aligning with some of the zero trust cryptographic requirements of CDM. It'll be interesting to see how going forward, if agencies can leverage that to help this issue scale as they start tackling it. I saved this question specifically for the end because I didn't want to get us off track right at the beginning, but AI-enabled quantum computing. Looking forward, as this is going to be a 10-year event, and everyone right now is racing forward on both of these technologies. And I think Dylan put it best. Like, we always look at it from the threat side because we're cybersecurity people, but these are amazing technologies that are going to completely revolutionize our businesses, our federal government, how we communicate. And as these two technologies grow together, I'm interested in throwing it open to the full panel here. Topics like you mentioned, crypto agility, right? Do you mind talking and maybe we can talk a little bit more about why crypto agility is so important, especially as we see technologies like AI-enabled quantum computing start to take off over the next decade?
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about AI and quantum computing being developed, one thing is the attacks we're aware of in terms of that are applicable to cryptography today are assuming sort of our classical thinking about it. Now, once there's a quantum computer, once there's AI, who knows if we're going to be able to input our current known attacks. And then AI will help to either improve them, come up with something new, or basically enhance what we know today, right? It's going to be like a calculator that can calculate super large numbers. Of course, we all know multiplication, but it's going to be much faster to use a calculator, right? So similar thing for a quantum computer. We might know how to attack a certain algorithm, maybe even a quantum resistant algorithm, right? We might not even understand some of the attacks today because we don't have a hands-on quantum computer. Once it's available, and maybe AI is going to simulate it and run and say, you know what, you can optimize this. And all of a sudden, maybe some parameters need to be tweaked, or maybe some algorithms are going to become weak. So this is why crypto agility is needed. We have no idea in terms of, I guess we do have an idea, but we don't have 100% idea of what exactly is going to happen, right? Again, quantum computing is very probabilistic based. That's why we have no deterministic understanding of what is going to be the outcome. But there's always probability that there's going to be enhancements to crypto analysis. If there's enhancements, if it's going to show that some algorithms are weaker or completely weak or maybe not applicable to certain cases, we need to be able to change them. So we should be able to react fast. And this is why crypto agility is needed. And this is, the nice effort by NIST that they're trying to standardize algorithms from different types. There's lattice-based, there's hash-based, and most likely there's going to be a code-based standardized in the next round of standards, etc. So it's nice to have them based on different mathematical problems. Because if you ask anybody, can you give me 100% assurance that lattice-based is never going to be broken? Not a single cryptographer will give you that assurance. Same thing for for other areas in there. So therefore, you really need to be able to change it fast and have alternatives if needed. With respect, again, enhancement of technologies, in this case, using quantum AI.
Yeah, Davis, the crypto agility concept is one that will benefit from a little bit of standardization. It'll be dangerous to say it that way, but just to get the message out, what do we mean when we say agility? Because it means a little bit of different things to different people at different times in the technology pipeline. And so if I told you that crypto agility technical mechanisms include things like protocol level negotiations, we kind of talked about that with TLS, API use, how the libraries that are being touched upon, these are all sounding like hardware accelerators, hardware secured all these are things that we may inventory and we should inventory and understand. Well, now we're talking about a language of information sharing. And if we have language, of that, then we have something to put into an API system AI system to train. And so we may be developing the materials that will make things easier for us to do better analysis, but it also could be a threat because then it becomes something that people might try to collect and figure out and see what's happening, and they'll have the tools that can do that faster than we do it today. So that's how I look at it. Everything we do in security often means we're going to share more, and share security information is something NIST has been promoting for over a decade, and it becomes, oh, that's important to protect. Well, it's hard to also learn from inventories and share those results if we can't share them. So share, and share means more language, to play with in large language models.
Well, that's an incredible place to end, Bill, because I want to thank you guys all for sharing and bringing your passion, your knowledge to this. I want to thank InfoSec Global, AT&T, NIST, and the White House for making you all available to break this issue down. It's so critical. It's not a 2035 issue. It's a today issue. I think the federal government has signaled that. And want to go around the room. Any last comments from all our panelists?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to emphasize what I've been trying to say. Quantum computing and quantum technologies. Quantum computing is just one of the new technologies that's emerging. Will be as revolutionary as the computer revolution was back in the 1980s. It will fundamentally transform how we look at a whole range of things and give us capabilities and that we previously have only just imagined. We're looking forward. We're looking right now into a technological space that will bring so many great changes, and that is an important place to focus. And as Bill and as we've all been saying, there is a threat that goes along with that, and it's now is the time to address that threat. If we wait too long, the quantum revolution will crush us. We need to start the transition now. We need to start understanding our systems, start understanding our networks, with that inventory of cryptographic systems as one part of it. And we need to put in place those practical plans so that we can get ahead of the threat and be able to focus on the opportunities.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that have been shared today from my fellow panelists have been, spot on and great, and brings a lot of attention to this very important topic, very important subject. One of the things when I look at the time frame that we have to deploy, the solutions to mitigate the threat, one of the items, I know we've already touched on it, but I just want to stress as we finish up here, the whole supply chain. If you look at the contract life cycles and what it's going to take to actually get all your vendors and your suppliers, get everybody on board with some of these new requirements for inventory or CBOMs, or getting crypto agility in place, there's not an organization out there that's not very dependent on their supply chain. So I think supply chain needs to get very, very heavy attention, like in the very near future.
Cool. CISA, DHS CISA is part of our collaboration, and they've identified some use cases for us to explore with the automated crypto discovery and inventory tools. And why I say that is that use cases, is a word that can hit at different parts of the technology pipeline here. But in this case, what do we learn? And if we can identify sort of the commodity things that everybody has one of, then you can kind of check off, hey, if that's going to be commercial gear that's going to be updated by my suppliers, good, I can now focus more directly on my legacy and my unique requirements, and I can identify how to protect the long-lived data in those systems more, and the systems that are being developed. If you're doing the airframes and anything you have to sign code, these are all places so that are going to need some attention. So get rid of the low-hanging fruit, because your big vendors will take care of it for you, to find out what's left for you to take care of yourself. Over.
And to bring a little bit more optimism to what we're describing, we keep on talking about quantum threat, and of course, Dylan has mentioned a lot of great capabilities that quantum computing will bring to us. But one thing important to understand: quantum computers are not going to be completely devastating. They're not going to be able to break absolutely everything. Therefore, the efforts to migrate to post-quantum cryptography or quantum-resistant cryptography are worth it. Quantum computers are capable of solving certain sets of problems. And unfortunately, among those problems, things like elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, RSA, so factoring-based problems, that's what it's capable of doing. These are among the class of problems that it's capable of solving. But there are problems that it's not capable of solve. That's where post-quantum cryptography is coming from. So therefore, it's not easy. It's hard to do the migration, but our efforts are going to be completely worth it. And the sooner we start, the better we're going to be prepared for the upcoming quantum computing.
Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate everybody joining in today online as well. And thank you very much for all of our panelists for sharing all of your knowledge. And everybody have a great day.